So all that jazz, a little different flavor. This is a very autobiographical picture, Bob Fosse's version of 8 1/2, right? Period where he's doing Lenny, the film with Dustin Hoffman, and then he's also putting on Chicago, the musical with Gwen Verdon, and he's calling himself Joe Gideon, instead of Bob Fosse. A lot of wine. I mean, there's not as much coke as we don't see him doing coke, but he's doing amphetamines all the time throughout the entire picture, which I guess they could let him, the MPAA would let him get away with it. The series that, Nicole Fosse, his daughter, who was, very clear about her struggle with substance abuse, she has a lot to do with that series and gets into much more detail. He was, in essence, molested at about 13 or 14. He was a young dancer in Chicago, burlesque show. His parents needed the money. It was during the Depression. He was 12, 13, 14, dancing at night, and again, in Fosse Verdon, it goes into much more detail. He's deeper resentment for it in the series Fosse Verdon. In the film, it's alluded to. He's embarrassed that there was a sexual incident. These women, it took his virginity, clearly has an issue with throughout the film, a la something like, Perks of a Wallflower. This is why he's drinking and drugging himself to death, Not simply because he likes the effect produced by alcohol, drugs, or anything like that, but in Fosse Verdon, it's a really powerful scene where Gwen Verdon is seeing another younger guy named Ron, and he's out there with Patty Chasky and Neil Simon, who are like his best friends. And they know how he lost his virginity. They're all sitting around, the table having cognacs or whatever. And it comes to his story. Everybody has a standard story. It's pretty funny. And then Fosse tells his story. At one point, Patty Chasky says something, "I don't know what you did, Bob Fosse, to deserve that." These two women basically...
The story is a salutary reminder of just how fucking unjust.
The only person who seems to understand it, the way it's shot in the flashback, clearly traumatic for him. And he does a sequence in stand-up where he talks about it, explicitly, how traumatic it was. And the only person who seems to know that is this younger guy, Ron, realizes this is not cool, right? And again, to be the reasoning that he's drinking and drugging himself to death, right? And then that's basically how he died. I mean, obviously he had a heart attack, he had a couple heart attacks. Because of Nicole Fosse's own experience, I think, her influence on the show brings in a much more kind of modern spin and interpretation. Just how she started to drink, that she would just kind of sip the adults' drinks and so forth. And I thought it was ironic that there was a situation kind of similar to the way Keith Richards was his kids. If you're old enough to do whatever, you're old enough to suffer the consequences. There's a scene, and because supposedly Marlon said something about that, Marlon Richards, about Keith, or Keith's attitude about kids, that if they were old enough to do whatever, they can, give them more credit, right? But for Nicole, there's a scene where, she's staying with her dad because she's having trouble with her mom, Gwen Verdon, and Bob Fosse comes home with a girlfriend, and Nicole's kind of wasted, and she's wondering, are you going to just leave me here while he goes in the room with you? And she's like, hey, if you're old enough to do it, you're old enough to deal with it, Which maybe there's something to be said for that, living with the consequences. But clearly you can see where, the apple didn't fall far from the tree, right? And attitudes were certainly much different about it, but the series makes more clear with maybe a more objective. It also makes him, a lot more of a scumbag in a way. I've always found the whole Me Too thing for men in power something that I never understood. I guess I adapted more of the American Gigolo, knowing it would feel like a lot more of a conquest if you did it with your own charm and looks and whatever, rather than using your position over another woman. I don't see how that's would make one feel very confident or much of a conquest, because he's using his position as the choreographer and the director of the film repeatedly to quote unquote kind of get laid. Which I thought, man, dude, that is not game at all, brother. You know, which again has to do probably with the alcoholism, the drug addiction, the you know, the massive ego with little to no self-esteem. Right? This is the only way I can do it, which is what's something that Harvey Weinstein said. You know, when he was talking about what he was doing, oh, I didn't think I could just get it done on my own. You know, okay, but dude, too fucking bad. You know what I mean? That does not excuse you. You know, so Fosse Verdon, I've seen it so many times. It's an interesting thing to look at. My only qualm with it is, you know, I like Lin-Manuel Miranda. He has no business playing Roy Scheider. Oh my God, I mean, he does look a little like him. He said the voice is horrendous. With all due respect, he's just not man enough. Roy Scheider's a man. I mean, God, I wish I'd gotten someone else to play the Roy Scheider. You know, Joe Gideon part, whatever. And I do like Lin-Manuel, but that was a fumble. That was an interception. That was a brilliant series, and the way it deals with more explicitly with the drugs and alcohol, with the addiction, is certainly very powerful. You know, and more, not at the kind of the clinical level that The Shining does, more a modern level. I don't know. Those two films explicitly, artfully, really delve into quote unquote the disease very skillfully. In my opinion, two of the best films. Or I guess, you know, I'd say The Shining is, you know, Fosse's just a great example, as well as we should talk about There Will Be Blood as